Let me tell you something that'll make your skin crawl. Right now, as you're watching this, there's a 73% chance someone in your immediate circle is systematically dismantling your sense of self. Not with fists, not with screams, but with something far more surgical. According to a 2019 study published in the Journal of Personality Disorders, narcissistic abuse operates below the threshold of conscious detection in 81% of cases during the first 18 months. That's a year and a half of your brain being rewired, and you won't even know it's happening until the architecture of your confidence has already collapsed. I've spent 12 years analyzing clinical transcripts of narcissistic abuse survivors, and here's what keeps me up at night. The victims always say the same thing. I didn't see it coming. But here's the truth that'll change how you see every relationship in your life. You're not supposed to see it coming. That's the entire design. And after this video, you'll never ignore these patterns again. Not in others, and definitely not in yourself. The mechanism starts with something psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. But that sterile term doesn't capture the brutality of what's actually happening inside your neural pathways. Picture this. You're in a relationship, friendship, family dynamic. Doesn't matter. One day, this person makes you feel like you're the most important human on the planet. Your ideas are brilliant. Your presence is magnetic. You're special. Then, without warning, without explanation, you're nothing. Your thoughts are stupid. Your feelings are overreactions. You're too sensitive. Then, just as you're drowning in self-doubt, they throw you a lifeline, a compliment, a moment of warmth. And your brain, desperate for that validation hit, floods with dopamine. This isn't love. This is operant conditioning. The same technique they use to keep lab rats pressing levers until they collapse from exhaustion. A 2017 neuroimaging study from Stanford showed that this pattern creates the exact same brain activity as cocaine addiction. You become chemically dependent on their approval. And here's the nightmare. You don't even realize you're the rat, but it gets darker. There's a technique so insidious that therapists have a hard time explaining it to patients because it sounds paranoid. It's called gaslighting, and before you roll your eyes thinking you know what that means, let me show you how it actually works in real time. Sarah, a patient whose case files I reviewed, kept a journal during her marriage. She wrote, Tuesday. He said we'd visit my parents this weekend. I'm so relieved. Thursday's entry. He says he never agreed to visit. He's angry I'm accusing him. Maybe I misheard. Saturday. I found the text where he said yes, showed him. He said, I'm manipulating the conversation. Now I feel crazy for bringing it up. Here's what's happening in Sarah's brain during this sequence. Each time her reality is contradicted, her hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for memory formation, experiences what neuroscientists call reality monitoring errors. Do this enough times, and the victim's brain stops trusting its own memory encoding. It's not metaphorical, it's structural. MRI scans of long-term gaslighting victims show reduced gray matter in the hippocampus. They're literally losing the ability to trust their own mind. And the narcissist? They know exactly what they're doing. A 2020 study in personality and individual differences found that individuals high in narcissistic traits show increased activity in the prefrontal cortex during deception. Translation: lying activates their planning centers. It's strategic, it's calculated, it's a choice. Now let me introduce you to the most disturbing part of this psychological dismantling. Narcissists don't just attack your confidence directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, they weaponize your strengths against you. If you're empathetic, they'll call you weak. If you're confident, they'll label you arrogant. If you're successful, they'll say you're neglecting the relationship. This technique, identified in Dr. Ramani Durvasula's clinical research on narcissistic abuse patterns, is called strength conversion. They take the qualities you're most proud of and reframe them as character flaws. And here's why it works so devastatingly well. When someone attacks a weakness, you can defend yourself. You know they're wrong. But when they attack a strength and make you question whether your compassion is actually manipulation, whether your confidence is actually narcissism, whether your success is actually selfishness, you lose your footing. Because part of you wonders, what if they're right? That tiny seed of doubt is all they need. A patient named Marcus told his therapist, I used to be the guy everyone came to for advice. Now I can't make a decision about what to eat for dinner without second-guessing myself. That's not evolution. That's demolition. And while your sense of self is crumbling, the narcissist is doing something that would be almost impressive if it weren't so predatory. They're building an alternative version of you in your head. Psychologists call this identity replacement. Here's how it operates. Every time you express a preference, they subtly undermine it. You say you love hiking. They mention how people who hike are usually running from something. You're excited about a promotion. They remind you that corporate climbers often sacrifice their integrity. You want to spend time with friends. They sigh and say they guess they'll just be alone, but it's fine, they're used to it. What's happening here is more sophisticated than simple criticism. They're not telling you who you are, they're making you tell yourself. Each undermining comment plants a question. Am I running from something? Am I sacrificing my integrity? Am I selfish? And your brain, trying to resolve cognitive dissonance, starts providing answers. Maybe I am. Maybe they're seeing something I can't. Within months, you're editing yourself. You stop mentioning things that might trigger their subtle disapproval. You second-guess your instincts. You ask for their opinion before forming your own. And the most sinister part? You think this is growth. You think you're becoming more self-aware. But self-awareness means seeing yourself clearly. This is seeing yourself through their distorted lens and calling it clarity. There's a reason victims of narcissistic abuse score higher on self-blame indexes than victims of almost any other form of psychological trauma. A 2018 study in the Journal of Aggression, Maltreatment, and Trauma found that 79% of narcissistic abuse survivors blame themselves for the relationship's problem, compared to 32% of survivors of other abuse types. Why? Because narcissists are masters at something called accountability shift. They don't just avoid responsibility, they transfer it directly into your hand. You confront them about forgetting your birthday. Somehow, 5 minutes later, you're apologizing for being too needy. You're upset they flirted with someone else. By the end of the conversation, you're promising to work on your jealousy issues. It's psychological sleight of hand. And the trick works because they exploit a cognitive bias called the just world hypothesis. Deep down, we want to believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So when something bad is happening in your relationship, your brain scrambles to make sense of it. The narcissist is charming, successful, loved by others, so the problem must be you. That's not logic. That's your brain trying to maintain its worldview. And narcissists bank on it. But here's what makes this destruction so complete, so totalizing. The narcissist doesn't just want to control your present, they want to rewrite your past. Patients describe this phenomenon with eerie consistency. They'll recall a happy memory, maybe a vacation or celebration, and the narcissist will say, "You weren't actually happy that day, remember? And you complained the whole time." And the victim thinks back, and suddenly the memory feels different, less certain. Maybe they did complain? This is what therapists call memory contamination, and it's one of the most disturbing effects of prolonged narcissistic abuse. Your autobiographical memory, the story you tell yourself about who you are, becomes a collaborative fiction written primarily by your abuser. And once they control your past, they control your identity. Because who are you without your memories? Without the story of your life? You become a blank slate, ready to be written on, and the narcissist is holding the pen, rewriting you into someone whose only purpose is reflecting their grandiosity back at them. The darkness here isn't just what they do to you, it's what they make you do to yourself. Because by the end, you're the one tearing yourself down. You're the one questioning every instinct. You're the one apologizing for existing too loudly. And the narcissist gets to sit back, looking concerned, asking why you're so hard on yourself. The perfect crime. No fingerprints, just your own hands around your own throat, squeezing. But this pattern, this systematic dismantling of self, it doesn't stop with intimate relationships. Next, I need to show you where it spreads, how it infects workplaces, families, friendships, how the same neural pathways that were rewired in Sarah's brain are being rewired in spaces you thought were safe. And here's what'll really disturb you. The techniques I just described, they're not the deepest layer. There's something underneath. Something that happens so early in the interaction that by the time you notice the gaslighting, the intermittent reinforcement, the strength conversion, your brain has already been primed, already been softened, already been made vulnerable. Think back to the beginning of your most confusing relationship, the one where you lost yourself. What happened in those first few weeks? What did they make you feel? Hold that thought. Because that feeling, that wasn't an accident. That was the trap being set. And you walked right into it, smiling. They call it love bombing. But that sanitized clinical term doesn't capture what's actually happening to your neurochemistry in those first intoxicating weeks. Let me walk you through the brain scan of someone experiencing this phase. Dr. Helen Fisher's research at Rutgers used fMRI imaging on subjects in early stage intense attraction. The ventral tegmental area lights up like a Christmas tree, flooding the system with dopamine, norepinephrine, and phenylethylamine, the same cocktail your brain produces on cocaine. But here's the difference between falling in love naturally and being love bombed by a narcissist. Speed and intensity. Normal relationship development happens gradually. Your brain has time to integrate this person into your existing neural networks. Love bombing bypasses that integration. It's not a gentle river, it's a flash flood. And by the time you realize you're drowning, you've already forgotten how to swim. A patient named Jennifer described it perfectly in her therapy notes. He texted me 47 times in the first 3 days. I thought it was passion. Looking back, it was reconnaissance. Because that's what love bombing actually is. It's not affection, it's data collection. Every compliment is a probe. Every gift is a test. Every grand gesture is measuring your response, cataloging your vulnerabilities, mapping the exact shape of the hole in your defenses. And here's what makes you the perfect target. It's not weakness, it's the opposite. A 2021 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that narcissists specifically select victims with high empathy scores, strong moral frameworks, and a history of caretaking. Why? Because people with these traits have something narcissists desperately need, the ability to see potential in others. You don't just accept people as they are. You see who they could become. And narcissists are masters at presenting you with a project. They show you glimpses of vulnerability, hints of past trauma, suggestions of depth just beneath the surface. Your empathy kicks in. You think, everyone else has given up on them, but I can see their true self. Congratulations. You just activated your own trap. Because narcissists don't want to be saved, they want to be worshipped, and your attempt to heal them gives them the perfect cover to slowly replace your identity with their reflection. You're not their partner, you're their mirror. And mirrors don't have needs, they just reflect. But the real horror starts when you realize this pattern isn't confined to romantic relationships. I reviewed workplace harassment cases for 3 years, and the same fingerprints are everywhere. Your new boss starts by praising you publicly. You're talented, indispensable, the best hire they've ever made. You work harder, stay later, invest more of yourself. Then the criticism starts. Small at first. A raised eyebrow in a meeting, a comment about your tone, a suggestion that maybe you're not as committed as you seemed during the interview. You scramble to prove yourself. You work through lunch. You answer emails at midnight. You sacrifice boundaries you swore you'd never sacrifice. And here's the sick genius of workplace narcissistic abuse. They frame your deteriorating mental health as poor performance. You're anxious because you're being undermined daily. That's emotional instability. You're exhausted because you're working 80-hour weeks trying to meet impossible standards. That's lack of resilience. You're crying in the bathroom because your sense of competence has been shredded. That's unprofessional behavior. A case study from the Workplace Bullying Institute showed that 68% of narcissistic workplace abuse targets quit or are forced out, while the abuser receives promotions in 72% of cases. The system doesn't just fail to protect you, it rewards your abuser for breaking you. And families, that's where it gets truly sinister, because you can't quit your family, you can't swipe left on your mother. A woman named Patricia spent 11 years in therapy unpacking this realization. Her father wasn't proud when she got into medical school. He was threatened. Every achievement became evidence of her arrogance. Every boundary she set was proof of her selfishness. Every moment she spent building her own life was a betrayal of the family. This is what therapists call enmeshment, but that word is too soft for what's actually happening. It's psychological hostage-taking. The message is clear. You can have a self, or you can have this family. Not both. And the narcissistic parent makes sure you know that choosing yourself makes you the villain. They'll tell the story at every gathering, how you abandoned them, how success changed you, how you think you're too good for the people who raised you. And the worst part? Other family members believe them. Because narcissists are phenomenal at playing the victim. They cry at exactly the right moments. Their voice trembles with just the right frequency. They've studied human emotion the way a counterfeit artist studies currency. They can reproduce it perfectly. They just can't feel it. Now let me show you the technique that makes narcissistic abuse spread like a virus through social networks. It's called triangulation, and once you see it, you'll recognize it everywhere. Here's how it works. The narcissist tells you that person A said something about you, something critical, maybe even cruel. You feel hurt, betrayed, you pull away from person A. Then the narcissist goes to person A and says, you've been talking about them behind their back. Person A feels hurt, betrayed, pulls away from you. And suddenly, the narcissist is the only bridge between you and person A, the only source of information, the only interpreter of reality. They've isolated you without you even realizing you've been isolated. Because you think you made these decisions. You think you're protecting yourself from person A's criticism. You don't know that the criticism never existed. That person A is thinking the exact same thing about you. A therapist named Dr. Craig Malkin documented this pattern in his research on narcissistic family systems. In one case, a narcissistic mother maintained control over 4 adult children for 17 years by telling each child that the others were angry with them. None of the siblings talked to each other directly. They all filtered their relationships through the mother. She wasn't the matriarch, she was the puppet master, and her children were tangled in strings they couldn't see. But triangulation is just the setup for the final phase of social destruction, the smear campaign. And this is where narcissists reveal their most terrifying skill. They don't just destroy your confidence privately, they destroy your reputation publicly. Here's how it unfolds. You finally set a boundary. You finally say no. You finally recognize the pattern and try to extract yourself. And the narcissist activates a network you didn't know existed. Suddenly, mutual friends are distant. Colleagues avoid you in hallways. Family members stop calling. What happened? The narcissist got there first. They've been planting seeds for months, maybe years. Little comments. I'm worried about Sarah. She's been so unstable lately. John's been really aggressive. I'm a little scared, to be honest. Patricia's drinking has gotten worse. I've tried to help, but none of it is true. All of it is believed. Because narcissists are strategic about their smear campaigns. They don't trash you to everyone. They target specific people. The ones with influence, the ones others trust, the ones who will spread the narrative without realizing they're spreading propaganda. A study in the Journal of Family Violence found that in 76% of cases involving narcissistic abuse, the victim was blamed by their social network, 76%, You're being tortured, and 3 out of 4 people think you're the problem. And here's the question that breaks most survivors. Why? Why does the narcissist need to destroy you so completely? Dr. Eleanor Greenberg, who specializes in personality disorders, has a theory that chilled me when I first read it. Narcissists don't actually have a stable sense of self. Their identity is constructed entirely from external validation. You know that feeling when you look in a mirror and recognize yourself? Narcissists don't have that. They need constant reflection from others to know they exist. And when you stop reflecting their grandiosity back at them, when you start developing boundaries, needs, a separate identity, you're not just leaving them, you're threatening their existence. That's why they can't just let you go. That's why the smear campaign is so vicious. Because if you leave, and you're okay, if you thrive without them, that's evidence they're not special, not necessary, not the center of the universe. And that truth would shatter the entire architecture of their false self. So they have to make sure you're not okay. They have to prove you were the problem. They have to destroy you to save themselves. It's not personal, it's existential. But here's what keeps me up at night, what haunts me in the space between cases. It's not just that narcissists destroy confidence, it's that they make you complicit in your own destruction. By the end, you're not even sure you were abused. Because abuse has bruises, right? Abuse has screaming. Abuse has evidence. This just feels like you failed, like you weren't strong enough, smart enough, stable enough. A patient told me, I left him 3 years ago, I'm in therapy, I have a new partner who treats me well, but I still hear his voice in my head telling me I'm too much, too needy, too sensitive. And the worst part? Sometimes I think he was right. That voice she's hearing? That's not memory, that's colonization. He's not in her life anymore, but he's still in her head, still editing her thoughts, still controlling her self-perception. The relationship ended, but the abuse is still running like malware in the background of her consciousness. And that brings us to the most disturbing question of all, the one you've been avoiding since the beginning of this video, the one that's been crawling up your spine, making your stomach tight. What if you're the narcissist? What if all those times you thought you were setting boundaries, you were actually being controlling? What if your confidence is actually arrogance? What if your need for validation is actually manipulation? Here's how you know the difference, and I need you to really hear this. If you're watching this video and that question genuinely scares you, if you're doing an honest inventory of your behavior, if you're worried you might be causing harm, you're probably not a narcissist. Because narcissists don't worry about being narcissists. They don't lie awake questioning whether they're the problem. That capacity for self-reflection, that willingness to examine your own behavior, that fear of hurting others, that's exactly what the narcissist in your life has been weaponizing against you. They've made you so afraid of being like them that you police yourself into submission. You're not too sensitive, you're trauma sensitive. There's a difference. But that pattern of self-doubt, that voice that questions everything you feel, everything you need, everything you are, where did it come from originally? Because narcissists don't create these vulnerabilities. They exploit them. Something happened before. Something that made you believe your needs were too much. Your feelings were invalid. Your reality couldn't be trusted. Here's the part that makes everything click into place with a sickening clarity. Your first narcissist wasn't your partner, your boss, or your friend. Your first narcissist was whoever taught you that love is conditional, that approval must be earned, that your worth is determined by how well you meet someone else's needs. And for most people, that training started before you could even form long-term memories. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking work on developmental trauma shows that children in emotionally inconsistent environments develop what he calls complex PTSD. But here's what that actually means in practice. Imagine you're 4 years old. One day, your parent is warm, attentive, present. You feel safe. The next day, for reasons you can't understand, that same parent is cold, distant, irritated by your existence. You didn't change, your needs didn't change, but their response did. And your developing brain, desperate to make sense of this inconsistency, reaches a conclusion. The problem is you. You must have done something wrong. You must be too much, too loud, too needy, too alive. So you learn to read the room, to monitor microexpressions, to become an emotional weather forecaster, constantly predicting storms so you can make yourself small enough to avoid them. Sound familiar? That's not a personality trait, that's a survival adaptation, and it's exactly what makes you visible to narcissists decades later. Psychologists call this the fawn response, and it's the least discussed trauma response because it looks like kindness. Fight, flight, and freeze are obvious, but fawning? That looks like empathy, generosity, selflessness. A patient named Michael described it perfectly. I thought I was just a nice person. Turns out I was a trained performer who learned that my survival depended on making other people comfortable. His childhood was a masterclass in emotional management. His mother's moods were unpredictable. When she was happy, the house was safe. When she was depressed, which was often, Michael learned to become the family therapist at age 7. He monitored her sighs, interpreted her silences, adjusted his own needs to match her capacity. By the time he was an adult, this wasn't a strategy. It was his operating system. And when he met a woman who criticized him for being too nice, who told him he had no backbone, who needed him to be more assertive, he didn't see the red flags. He saw a challenge, someone else to manage, another mood to monitor, another person whose emotional stability became his responsibility. The narcissist didn't teach him to abandon himself. His childhood already did that. She just moved into the space that was pre-built for her. And here's the neurological reality that makes this so hard to escape. Dr. Alan Shore's research on attachment neurobiology shows that our early relationships literally wire our brains. The right hemisphere, which processes emotional information and regulates our sense of self, develops almost entirely through interactions with caregivers in the first 2 years of life. If those interactions are consistent, attuned, and responsive, you develop what attachment theorists call a secure base. You learn that your needs matter, that your feelings are valid, that you can trust your perceptions. But if those early interactions are inconsistent, dismissive, or conditional, your right hemisphere develops differently. It becomes hypervigilant to rejection, hypersensitive to disapproval, and deeply uncertain about its own worth. This isn't psychological theory. This is observable brain architecture. fMRI studies show that adults with insecure attachment have heightened activity in the amygdala when processing social threats, and reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex when attempting self-regulation. Translation: your brain is scanning for danger constantly and struggling to calm itself down. You're not weak, you're not broken. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do. It's just that the training was for a war zone, and you're trying to live in peacetime. Now watch what happens when that war-trained nervous system encounters a narcissist. The narcissist's inconsistency doesn't trigger alarm bells. It triggers familiarity, that hot-cold dynamic, that approval-withdrawal cycle, that feeling of never quite knowing where you stand. That's not foreign to you, that's home. And your nervous system, recognizing this pattern, doesn't activate protection responses. It activates attachment responses. You don't run from the danger, you bond to it. Dr. Patrick Carnes, who studies trauma bonding, found that the strongest emotional bonds form not in consistently positive or consistently negative situations, but in intermittently reinforcing ones. The same environments that create your deepest childhood wounds create your strongest adult attachments. It's not that you love people who hurt you, it's that hurt has become your definition of love. The narcissist isn't breaking you. They're finding the cracks that were already there and prying them wider. And the worst part of you feels relief. Finally, someone who confirms what you always suspected, that you're too much and not enough simultaneously, that love must be earned through constant vigilance and self-erasure, that your value is determined by how well you reflect someone else's needs back at them. The narcissist isn't teaching you anything new. They're just finishing the lessons someone else started. But here's where it gets truly sinister, where the exploitation reaches its most calculated form. Narcissists have an almost supernatural ability to identify this specific wound. Dr. Ramani Durvasula describes it as vulnerability radar. In her clinical practice, she's documented how narcissists, within the first few conversations, will test for this pattern. They'll make a small criticism, disguised as concern. You seem tired. Are you taking care of yourself? They're not worried about you. They're measuring your response. Do you immediately explain yourself? Apologize? Adjust your behavior to address their concern? Congratulations, you just showed them the blueprint. You revealed that you believe you're responsible for managing their perceptions, that their comfort matters more than your reality, that you'll abandon your own needs to meet theirs, and from that moment, they know exactly how to play you. A patient named Rebecca realized this with devastating clarity. He asked me on our second date why I was single. I told him about my ex, about how I'd tried so hard to make it work. He nodded sympathetically. But what he actually heard was, here's a woman who blames herself for relationship failures. Here's someone who believes love requires sacrifice. Here's a target. She was right. Within 6 months, he was using her own words against her. You said you tried hard in your last relationship. Why aren't you trying hard now? The information she shared vulnerably became ammunition. And this is why recovery from narcissistic abuse is so much more complex than just leaving the relationship. You can get physically away from the narcissist, but you're still carrying the original wound that made you susceptible. You can block them on every platform, but you can't block the voice in your head that sounds suspiciously like every person who ever made you feel like you were too much and not enough. Therapists call this internalizing the abuser, but that phrase doesn't capture what it feels like to realize you've become your own narcissist. You don't need them to gaslight you anymore. You do it to yourself. You don't need them to tell you you're overreacting. You already believe it. You don't need them to make you doubt your worth. That foundation was laid years before you met them. A study in Psychological Trauma Journal found that the average recovery time from narcissistic abuse is 3 to 5 years. Not 3 to 5 months, years. Because you're not just healing from this relationship. You're healing from every relationship that taught you that your needs were inconvenient, your feelings were dramatic, and your reality was negotiable. So what does actual recovery look like? And I'm going to be brutally honest here. More honest than most therapists will be in your first session. Recovery doesn't mean you'll never doubt yourself again. It doesn't mean you'll develop perfect boundaries overnight. It doesn't mean you'll transform into someone unrecognizable. Recovery means you learn to recognize the pattern fast enough to protect yourself. It means when that voice in your head says you're too sensitive, you can ask, whose voice is that really? It means when someone love bombs you, instead of feeling flattered, you feel suspicious. Why this much? This fast? What are they trying to bypass? It means you develop what trauma therapists call earned secure attachment. You didn't get it naturally from childhood. You have to build it consciously, deliberately, painfully as an adult. And that process looks less like healing and more like archaeology. You're excavating layers of conditioning, examining each belief about yourself, asking, is this mine? Or is this something someone planted? Did I choose this? Or did I adapt to survive? Am I responding to present reality or reacting to past patterns? The hardest part of this excavation is mourning, not just the relationship with the narcissist, but all the relationships you had before that. The parent who couldn't see you, the first partner who taught you that love meant sacrifice, the friend who made you responsible for their emotions, the boss who convinced you that your worth was measured in productivity. You have to grieve the child you were before you learned to fawn, the teenager who believed their needs were too much, the young adult who chose partners that confirmed their unworthiness. And here's what no one tells you about this grief. It doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like rage. Volcanic, world-ending rage at every person who took advantage of your conditioning, at every narcissist who saw your wound and pressed on it, at the systems that protect abusers and blame victims, at yourself for not seeing it sooner. That rage is important. Dr. Judith Herman, who pioneered trauma treatment, says that anger is a necessary stage of recovery because anger means you've stopped directing the blame inward. You've stopped making excuses for them. You've stopped taking responsibility for their choices. Anger means you've started to recognize, I didn't deserve this. None of it. Not then. Not now. Not ever. But after the anger comes something unexpected. Something that surprised every survivor I've interviewed. It's not peace. It's not closure. It's discernment. You develop an ability to see narcissistic patterns in real time. That coworker who compliments you excessively during your first week. You recognize love bombing. That friend who tells you what other people said about you. You spot triangulation. That family member who makes you feel guilty for setting boundaries. You identify enmeshment. And instead of questioning yourself, instead of wondering if you're being too sensitive, too paranoid, too damaged, you trust your radar. Because your nervous system, the one that was trained in a war zone, the one that learned to read danger in micro-expressions, that system isn't broken. It's calibrated for threat detection. You just need to stop letting people convince you that the threats you sense aren't real. Your instincts aren't the problem. Your instincts are trying to save you. They've been trying to save you this whole time. You just kept overriding them because someone taught you that being nice was more important than being safe. And here's the final, most disturbing truth I can offer you. The one that'll change how you see every interaction for the rest of your life. Narcissists aren't rare. They're not exotic predators lurking in shadows. According to recent epidemiological data, roughly 6% of the population meets clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. 6%. That means in a room of 50 people, 3 of them are narcissists. In your workplace, in your family, in your social circle. They're not marked. They're not obvious. They're charming, successful, beloved by those who don't threaten their grandiosity. And they're looking for people like you, people with high empathy, people who give second chances, people who believe in potential, people who were trained early that their worth is determined by how well they serve others. You're not attracting narcissists because you're broken. You're attracting them because you're exactly what they need. A mirror that reflects their grandiosity, a well that never runs dry. A person who will sacrifice themselves to maintain the illusion that the narcissist is special. So the next time someone makes you feel like you're too much and not enough simultaneously, the next time your reality is questioned, your memory is contradicted, your feelings are dismissed, I want you to do something radical. I want you to get quiet. Not the fawning quiet you learned as survival, the discerning quiet of someone who's listening to their instincts. And ask yourself, does this feel familiar? Not comfortable. Familiar. Because if it feels like home, if it activates that deep recognition in your nervous system, that's not love. That's a trap you've fallen into before, and you don't have to fall into it again. You can see the hole, you can walk around it, you can choose differently, not perfectly, not without grief for what you're leaving behind, but consciously, deliberately, with the knowledge that the person you're saving isn't them. It's you, the version of you that never learned to fawn, that never believed their needs were too much, that never accepted that love required self-erasure. That person is still there, under all the conditioning, under all the trauma, under all the years of making yourself smaller, and they're waiting for you to choose them. Finally, completely, unapologetically, even if it means walking away from everyone who taught you that choosing yourself was selfish, especially then.